All right. Welcome, everyone. I am so pleased to see you all here. Anna, thank you for joining us. My name is Philip Elle. I am a freelance journalist based in my hometown of Providence, Rhode Island. I recently published a book on the shelf behind me. It's called Prescription for Pain: How a Once Promising Doctor Became the Pill Mill Killer. I was the guest in one of these SPJ New England author talks, and I had so much fun. I said, I want to do this, but on the other side. And I am so pleased to welcome my friend and colleague and fellow Michigan Wolverine, Anna Clark. Anna is a ProPublica journalist who lives in Detroit. She is the author of The Poison City, Flint's Water and the American Urban Tragedy, the book we're going to talk about tonight. The Poison City won the Hillman Prize for Book Journalism and the Rachel Carson Environmental Book Award, and it was longlisted for the Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Nonfiction. The buzz about this book was really remarkable. USA Today said, it's hard to overstate how important Anna Clark's new book is. The New York Times called it a comprehensive chronicle of the crisis with an eye for the institutional corruption and difference that enabled it. The Christian Science Monitor said The Poison City is a cautionary tale for every town and city across the land. So if you're tuning in from cities other than Flint, if you're watching from cities other than Flint, there will be plenty here for you to draw from. Anna's writing has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Elle, Politico, the Columbia Journalism Review, and other publications. She edited a Detroit Anthology, a Michigan notable book. She is a member of the faculty at Alma College's MFA program in creative writing. She was a Fulbright Fellow in Kenya and a Knight-Wallace Journalism Fellow at the University of Michigan. Anna, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm so glad to be here. This is a wonderful excuse to talk with you again.
Yes. We have so much to dive into, and I wanted to add that if folks have questions for Anna, feel free to drop those into the chat. We will carve out some time before the hour is through to get to those. But to kick things off, Anna, I wanted to know a couple things, just if you had any connection to Flint before starting this story, and what motivated you to tell this story?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for folks who aren't familiar with Michigan, Flint is about a little more than an hour's drive from Detroit, which is where I've lived since 2007. And it's a city that has the story that it's experienced over the 20th century is very familiar to many of us in a lot of these industrial in the industrial heartland. It's a place that I'd visited for fun, occasionally I'd taken like day trips out there with folks. I knew folks who had come from there, but I didn't know it super well as a place in its own right until I started regularly reporting on it. I think I'd done a couple of stories based in Flint pre-water crisis. But kind of like shorter, more discrete pieces. On a curious note, though, I didn't know until while I was working on the book that I had a personal connection until much later. I found out that my grandmother was born in Flint and that she was born to the one of the UAW sit-down strikers at General Motors in the famous strike in the 1930s that led to the first collective bargaining agreement in the auto industry, like with the most powerful company in the world at the time. Big deal. And it was a sit down thing. They like shut down plants. He was in there and he had to like sneak out in this like January snow to like go be with his wife while my grandma was being born. I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. I didn't even know that though until it was like 2/3 of the way through this whole process.
So I guess I should rewind a little bit. So you're native to Michigan?
I am. I grew up in the southwest corner of the state, near Lake Michigan, went to school in Ann Arbor, and to our New England friends, had a few years in Boston before I found my way back to Detroit.
Okay. So at what point did you say, were you covering this story while it was unfolding, or did you decide to write the book later on and kind of reverse engineer some of the research? How did that work?
Yeah, I feel like I have a kind of a multi-strain answer to that, which is what everybody loves. I feel like a lot of people, I should have been there sooner. There was, I remember when the announcement of the switch was happening, I remember hearing reports, some in the local news, some from others that things, the switch, famous water switch was going poorly. Um, though the full scope of that was just quite unclear at the time. And I remember thinking as a full-time freelancer then, like, oh, this is something I'd want to dig into as somebody who's interested in how cities like this work and don't work, and how the cost of infrastructure and public works and what it means for human lives. But I kept thinking like, oh, well, like I'm too late, like the story peaked, it's over. It's like other people already got it. They're already telling it. It seemed, I didn't see like a clear way in. And it's worth noting, I think this has a lot to do with how things played out, journalistically and beyond. This was happening at the same time as Detroit's bankruptcy was happening, and a huge amount of which was absorbing a huge amount of attention, and importantly so, like really good reporting was happening, really important stories needed to be unraveled. And I think looking backwards, I think there was an unfortunate realization that our news infrastructure in Michigan wasn't equipped to handle two emergencies at the same time.
Hmm. I'm going to jump around a bit, but you just made me think of there's something that I've mentioned to you before, which is that when I was working on my book about the opiate epidemic, about a doctor who broke the law and went to prison, there were already many books about the opiate epidemic at that point. And I took inspiration from something I saw you say. I don't remember where it was, but you were talking about how certain stories deserve multiple big looks at them. So I wanted to ask you, this is not the only book about the Flint Water Crisis, right? How
It
many,
is not, and it shouldn't be.
how many books, how many nonfiction journalism books have there been approximately?
Yeah, there's I mean, well, what's interesting is like I think mine is the only one that's comes from a journalist, but there's a number of other important stories. So there's one a memoir from the pediatrician, Dr. Mona, who played a critical role in the
Yeah,
crisis. That's
yeah,
a really important contribution because she can tell the story as the first person. She has
right.
expertise in children's health. She takes, she has a different focus than mine that is more focused on kind of urban policy and history and all this. There's also a very good book by Benjamin Pauley called Flint Fights Back. It was published by MIT Press a little while ago. He also lives in Flint. He's a social scientist who teaches at Kettering. He has two young children. He's coming at this from that perspective, as well as somebody who, with a social science perspective, had been kind of embedded with a lot of the activists. And he tells a story showing how the water activism in Flint is twinned with democracy activism, and seeing some of the reverberations and connections with some of the similar sorts of activism that happen in communities around the world. Super interesting. There's a young adult book, kind of tells the story from the Flint Water Crisis from that perspective. There are probably others, and that I'm just blanking off the top of my head.
Yeah, this
And
is
there will be
not,
more to come, right? Like this is the other thing. There's a lot that's still unfolding, and others, including other journalists, should weigh in,
well, well,
absorb more.
while I've got you on the record being recorded, I wanted to just have you share the same wisdom you shared with me, or that I saw you share. Maybe it's on Facebook. I don't remember. Here I was wondering, if it was worthwhile adding another book to a subject that had been covered in other books, and you had this really eloquent and wise answer. What if other folks are thinking about telling a story that's already been told somewhat? Why does a story of this size, why is it worth doing multiple books?
Well, because no one book, no matter how beautifully done, no matter how talented the writer and reporter, is going to hold everything. I truly think that news is overrated in the news business. I mean, of course it's important. We all of us want to like chronicle
Yeah.
and discover what is not yet publicly known. That's just today, big news out of North Carolina. Like, I mean, it's important to bring new information to the public conversation. I get that, but I also think that sometimes we overlook the value of investigating the stories we think we know.
Mm,
There has been a little bit more of a movement of this in some recent years. There's reporters like Rachel Swarns, who did the wonderful reporting about Georgetown University and the sale of slaves. There's the Julie Brown, who did the Epstein reporting. That was like going back to like 2009, and sort of she didn't know she was going to find anything, but like, re-looking at things. And for those of us like, like for like the opioid crisis, I mean, well, first of all, the scale of it, like there's so much to tell, and different ways of telling it. Um, um, there's so much that individual reporters and writers can offer by reaching out to different, telling the story in a different way to
yeah.
different audiences, bringing in different information, coming out at a different moment in time that itself can like change how we see things. I mean, it's I think that like I really think we need to like, I think sometimes I definitely understand and can relate to some of that like anxiety of like, oh, like I was feeling it like with some of those early like kind of Flint stories, like, oh, it's over, quote unquote, for the reporter. Like but there was more to tell. And sometimes we just gotta like just kind of poke around and give ourselves the gift of being curious and finding our way into a story um that matters enough
Mhm.
to interrogate more than once, more than 10 times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's so much going on in this book. I'm in awe of the way you tied it together, and in particular, the way that you offer history and context about different subjects. In particular, your section on lead was just like amazing. Um, uh,
That's fun to hear, because honestly, I'm like, I was geeking out on that. Like that was really fun.
no, the lead chapter, I was like, she's really cooking here. But so, I mean, just to give readers an idea, you tell the story of, well, you tell the history of Flint, you tell the history of the crisis, you talk a bit about, the before, the during, the after, you talk about the crisis before people took note. But you also have these kind of side uh, detours or pieces of context. They're not detours because they're essential. One is about the history of lead pipes and lead poisoning and what lead does to people. Another, I think, is about kind of the history of like urban water infrastructure. So there's a lot in here. How did you decide how you were going to approach this story, and what pieces of context you were going to keep in and what you were going to leave out? Can you talk
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah. Well, if one of these is like, this is a gift of having the space of a book compared to
Yeah.
even a long feature article. I did a long feature article. There was, but by the time I did that story, there was abundant coverage on everybody's doing Flint
Yeah.
stories. Like this was like, I don't know if folks remember, but like, by early 2016, there was, I mean, it was just the spotlight that was on this like mid-sized town was just bewildering. I mean, there was
Mhm.
like a protest Oscars that were held there. There was a presidential debate that was held there because of all the things that are going on. There's
Mm,
like there is the FBI's there. There's congressional investigation. There was like, it was just one thing after another. It was just this like white hot,
mm,
spotlight that was for better or worse, like coming out of the city. And one thing I noticed in the stories I was doing, and in even the many stories I was doing, is it's like how much context was missing,
yeah.
even ones that had brought in some, meaningful history. I mean, there was there was a lot, it just seemed like there was just whole chapters that were absent, that were difficult to understand what was happening, truly understand what was happening without like reckoning with what had come before, right? Like what was, how, I think that the question that kind of brought, that synthesized like the different threads is like, what made Flint precarious in the first place? You know, like why was it in a position for something like this to happen? Why was it in a position to be ignored for astonishingly long time before there was like a meaningful response to intervene? And to understand that, like, I think you know, you do have to like look back at to like, how was the city literally made? You know, why was it made this way? Who was making those decisions? How has that legacy of those decisions uh, uh, created a kind of momentum that brought us to where we are today? And one thing that I'm really fascinated with as a reporter in general, but especially with a story like this one, is that kind of like pragmatic question of like, well, and what do you do? You know, like for all of us people, like we inherit this history. And even when we look back with clear eyes and see that, you know, wow, there were opportunities to make different decisions with not just a city with Flint, but with cities that look like Flint all over the country. This is like, this is a pattern. There has been a systemic pattern that of policy decisions that have concentrated poverty and disinvestment and just chronic harm, you know, into discrete communities all around the country. And I think we have to like unravel the connections here to really get the big picture here, because like the danger is to understand Flint is like such a discrete story that it's requires only like some technical local fixes and then we're done, when the real roots of the problem go back much longer.
You may have already answered this, but as you were talking, it made me want to ask a basic question of what were you trying to do with this book?
Well, I feel like, you know, this might seem simple, but it didn't feel simple at the time. I wanted to, number one, I just wanted to tell the truth, you know, like without being cute about it. Like there is so much misinformation and honest confusion and disputed narratives about, to this day, about like what happened in Flint and why. And even those of us in Michigan, if they ask like, why did the Flint water crisis happen? People might not know. They, you know, because they hear it a lot. They got the gist, but like, you know, like there's a lot of just a lot of confusion, because it was this iteratively told story, sometimes in contradictory ways. I have seen in recent, I won't blast anyone, but like I've seen front page stories in major media organizations that do the little summary paragraph of like what happened in Flint when they're doing some kind of like anniversary piece or whatever. And the shortcut is like they switched, they frequently say they switched to the polluted Flint River, as if the river itself is like what causing. Not true, not true, never been true. It's but okay, so number one, I just wanted to be accurate, and this is a lot of, and this was a bit of a lift too, right? You know, because I had a big learning curve in like, I don't know, how is water even tested? Like, I don't know how to,
Well, we're gonna get to the sidence in the book later in this conversation.
it was like, I feel like I should have a degree now, but I did, but you know, anyway, so, but I really wanted to be like accurate, number one. Second, I wanted it to be good, good in a way that it connected with people who, well, first of all, those who are most impacted, I wanted them to recognize their community and their story in it. It's obviously people had different experiences and have different viewpoints and all that, but I wanted it to feel, I wanted there to be some like fundamental recognition that by those most impacted. And I wanted it to, you know, provide something meaningful in documenting what happened for them. And also, I wanted people who have no connection to Flint or Michigan, who never think about particularly think about like water or pipes or infrastructure or urban policy or the Kerner Commission or whatever, I wanted them to find their way in this too. I wanted to read in a way that gave the readers credit for their intelligence, but also was like engaging enough that they'd stay with me through a lot of those tangents. And one last thing, like I also wanted to be careful about not telling this in an overly individual fashion. What happened to a whole community. Who did it is more than one person. Like it's an ensemble story. I didn't want to like simplify this to the point where I have like a clear, this like narrow hero villain story that like belies the true
Yeah, I liked there was
collectivity here.
a part in the book where you said, and maybe this gets into a question I wanted to ask you about what lessons there were for the media, but you said like there was an addiction to heroes narratives about Flint, and also a tendency, and I found this interesting, to drift toward white savior narratives as well. But since we're on the subject of paragraphs that refresh people on what's going on, first I'm going to count on you to text me afterward which news organization that was.
I will.
But I
Off
was
the record.
right. I was reading this piece you wrote earlier this year, co-wrote for ProPublica, 10 years after the Flint Water Crisis, distrust and anger linger. And toward the top of that piece, you do a really excellent job, you and your co-author, Sarah Beth, of recounting what happened. I'm going to read some of it. 10 years ago this spring, public officials made catastrophic changes in the city's water source and treatment, then used testing practices that hid dangers. As problems emerged, they failed to appropriately change course. Residents raised repeated concerns about the color, odor, and taste of the water, but struggled to get a sufficiently serious response, especially from state and federal authorities. It didn't help that the distressed city was under the authority of a state-appointed emergency managers, an unusually expansive oversight system that residents decried. For a crucial period of about 3.5 years, local decision-making was not accountable to voters. The result, excess exposure to toxic lead, bacteria, and a disinfection byproduct in Flint's drinking water. An outbreak of Legionnaire's disease sickened 90 people and killed 12. The toll is likely higher, as Frontline documented. The water, now drawn from the Flint River, wasn't treated with corrosion control, a violation of federal law, so the pipes deteriorated more every day. That, to me, those two paragraphs, is a pretty good summary of what happened for people who don't remember.
And it's a lot to remember, to be fair. I don't want that to be, I'm sympathetic. It is hard to get the word count down when you're just trying to give the backstory. I get it. We've all run into this. I'm sure you had that experience too with your book.
And there's good reason why people are drawn to hero villain stories, because they're easier to digest and remember.
Yep.
Did you struggle with, we as journalists always want to make things readable and legible. Did you struggle with whether or not to simplify the story?
Yeah, I think there was two levels of this. Like one, early on, I think I was pretty clear that I wanted to try to write this as more of an ensemble story, because it was clear because I was writing about cities, right? And cities are like inherently collective, and I wanted the form of the book to kind of match what I was saying. So if I went back, I feel like, and did it over again, I would do it better. I hope I made it my best, because it is harder. But I hope I was able to bring in a sense of like individuals and characters and so forth, while still like keeping an eye on this ensemble, because that was the story I was telling. The medium is the message, right?
And just to pause you for a sec, you mean ensemble both on the perpetrator side and the people affected side?
Exactly. Because the core of this book is like certainly to document like really extraordinary drama, and that like happened in Flint. Like this is like these series of crises that make up this overall crisis. And also, you know, to make this like kind of to set it in this like larger context of how and why this country has um uh had like had patterns of uh decades of systemic racism and disinvestment and neglect that leave urban cores disproportionately poor and disproportionately people of color, and why that plays, and what the cost of that is on this like very human level. Water, you know, I felt like it's really important to like look at that, because you know, all the people who've been trying to quote unquote fix Flint, you know, even pre-water crisis, the whole idea of this emergency manager is this idea that like you can solve all the problems, you know, just by having like total authority within the boundaries of the city. And look, you can't. Like they didn't, you know, because these are like these are bigger conversations to have. So anyway, so like I think I did want to like try to tell the story in a way that where the narrative modeled the 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 um the thesis in a way. So that was like one thing. And also, you know, in the course of my interviewing and talking to people, I just learned from others who were very very thoughtful and had put a lot of intention, you know, around this idea of challenging the idea of hero narratives in,
Mm.
you know, public health, especially realms, environmental justice, and so forth. You mentioned white saviorism. That's a very frequent um, um, formula to put on narratives like this. And it's not to say that individual people don't act heroically. There were people in Flint, a series of people who did extraordinary things, you know, and so it's not to like discredit any of that. I mean, there's a reason you and I are talking about this today. I mean, and it is because a number of people, beginning with the Flint residents themselves, you know, who were dogged in pursuing this, and reached out and found allies to help uh, um, get themselves believed in a way that they weren't on their own. They I feel like so I want to like give all that credit, but I also like I felt like this was an opportunity to try to like um you know, try to offer another way. I mean, I love Aaron Brockovich, the movie, beautifully told, great story. Is there are there like a civil action, the dark waters? We got legions of these, but is it possible to tell an environmental story in another way? Can we? And if we do so, does that like help create um help open up the idea that for folks in communities all over the country to embrace their own agency, right? To see themselves as like characters in their own stories. You know, this might be getting a little high-minded here, but I just really felt that I wanted to well, honor the like really heroic things that people did. I didn't want to like single out any one or two people as like the people who, you know, saved Flint or whatever, because it's just not true.
A lot of different questions, and I apologize for bouncing around. Let's talk about today, 2024. The article I read from that you published in ProPublica earlier this year, again, is called 10 Years After the Flint Water Crisis, Distrust and Anger Linger. So what's going on today? Are people drinking out of their taps in Flint?
I've heard mixed messages on this. There's well, first of all, the good news. The good news is most of the lead pipes in Flint have been replaced. They're not quite all of them. And there's also some like court-ordered like lawn repairs and so forth, and documentation that I think have yet to be done. But it's really truly almost done. The city's still offering free filters to people. The Michigan, in the wake of the water crisis, passed the strictest in the nation lead testing rules, stricter than federal. So when they say that Flint's water has, like been testing well for like 7 years, especially the most recent ones. That's meaningful because it's more rigorously tested. And there are ways for like community members to, to to ask questions. There's this like really innovative community water lab, for example, largely youth led, but with real science and supervision, behind it too, where that is providing like a way for people to, outside of the usual forums, to get their water tested, to ask questions, to like potentially raise red flags if need be. There's just like really interesting things that have been happening in the community as the relationship with water changes. That said, there are a lot of people who don't trust the water. And while there's sometimes been folks who have expressed bewilderment at that or frustration with that, I want to emphasize that, like, the rationality where a lot of people are coming from, in the sense that like the agencies that are saying the water is safe now are the same agencies that were saying it was safe when it wasn't. There, like this is the kind of thing, like when you break trust like this, it just takes time to earn that trust back, to prove worthy of that trust. And for a lot of people, some people have felt comfortable easing up on it. There's not the same kind of level of like bottled water deliveries as there used to be. But a lot of people are really going out of their way to avoid drinking tap water. There's somebody that my partner on that last story talked with. She was a teenager during the water crisis, so she herself was especially affected. She's now a mom of 3. She's was living in a recovery house. She has like limited income, and she's spending some of it on like bottled water deliveries, like from Walmart, for her babies, for like like for bottled water. And for a time she was also making sure they were like bathed out of the city, like really going out of her way just to be safe. Like people feel a lot of there's a lot of folks that just feel like a tremendous anxiety about this, and in this like day-to-day chronic way. And it's just not the kind of thing where you can sort of snap your fingers and be like, safe now, it's fine, just drink it, and everybody's like cool with that. I mean, it's just this is part of the reason it feels very ongoing.
The damage is such a multifaceted thing. And in the excerpt from the article I read, you talked about the death toll from the Legionnaires outbreak, which was part of this crisis.
Yeah.
There were multiple manifestations. Lead wasn't the only one. Is it possible to tell our listeners what the human toll of this was? I mean, can you take a stab at that?
Yeah, it's a tough one because on one hand, how to measure, and on the other hand, sort of an ongoing thing. If somebody really was like, a lot of the ways lead can affect the body, it may not show up for a long period of time, and may be difficult to prove any kind of like one-to-one connection. That's another thing. A lot of folks who are describing like they were living with certain diseases or certain health issues, and maybe they very likely would have experienced it no matter what, but also maybe not, and so they like kind of, there's this ambiguity that I think folks live with, because it's difficult to prove definitively yes or no. But I can say with the Legionnaires thing in particular, the official toll on that was 90 were sickened and 12 died. The frontline report that was kind of mentioned there, which folks should read, or see, it's like a good broadcast where they kind of, because this Legionnaires outbreak wasn't disclosed until after the fact, it was like this 2-year outbreak that wasn't really publicly acknowledged until January 2016. So after Flint had already switched back to Detroit's water system, they kind of went through data on pneumonia cases and deaths, and we're able to show that how there's like kind of like a disproportionate, number. And they say you can't, we don't know for sure, but like they're kind of like say that like that might suggest that the toll was larger than otherwise, and just people didn't, and people, including health professionals, didn't know to be like looking for this in particular. So that's tricky. I think there's individual health costs, there's individual like psychic costs, right? Just like kind of like a lot of people have, researchers and reporters have kind of shown, just a lot of the like trauma and PTSD people experience, whether or not like they had any like health indicators, physically, but like you go through something like this on top of like, I mean, the community was in a difficult position anyway. There's a lot of difficult things going on, and people, it cumulatively puts people in a very painful position. And the city itself, I think, as a whole, has like taken some hits too. I mean, it's lost since the water crisis began, I guess, with the switch in 2014. Since then, they've lost another like 20% of their population, which is notable. I mean, it has been like losing population since 1970, but it's a pretty big jump for the last 10 years. So it's now a city of about 80,000. When the water switch happened, it was close to 100,000. This, has all the challenges, where, providing excellent infrastructure for all people, and making sure they're getting the civic services they deserve every day is difficult to do when you have fewer folks paying into a system that's just as large as it ever was.
I want to just remind folks listening that you are welcome to write some questions in the chat for Anna. We'll carve out some time at the end. We'll probably go a little bit past 8. So feel free to include those. Something I thought about with my book is I wrote a book about a guy that made me angry, and I knew it probably wouldn't be great to get angry at him on the page, and I tried my best to get out of the way and kind of allow my readers to get angry. And I'm just fascinated by how we tell stories that are important and that may anger people, and how you deal with the anger you may personally feel. So that's kind of a convoluted way of asking. This is also an anger-inducing book, an anger-inducing situation. How did you deal with anger in your reporting process, in your writing process, in absorbing other people's anger and dealing with your own? Can you talk about that?
One thing that makes me sad is I think you're one of the few people who've asked a question like that about the emotional experience of kind of working through stories like that. And that makes my emotion is sadness. I mean, I think us reporters are full human beings, right? Like the emotion is part of often what gets us into this work in the first place, right? We just care about things. We care about what happens. And yeah, I mean, it can be like for a lot of us when we're really in the slog, we're trying to, and this was true for me with the Flint book. I should not just I it. Like when when I'm kind of really trying to make my way through this, get this done, understand all the technical stuff, fact check it, make sure I'm like still eating, because sometimes I was forgetting, which is not normal for me. I love eating. Like, I was like, just like, and just, like the emotion part, it feels like you don't have time for it a lot, like you just kind of like push it down and you're like, I'll feel this later. But it comes, of course, it's there anyway.
Yeah.
I think the things that were most helpful during the process and after it, because I think there was kind of like this like long hangover for me afterwards where, and I don't know if you're in that now, but like, it's just like this long hangover where it's like, I was just so exhausted for a long time, and just like the idea of like writing anything else felt impossible, and it was just really hard. And it's just, that I think a lot of that was like kind of this, because I needed to give my full attention for once to like the emotional experience of it. I felt like the emotional part of it was, I felt it. I mean, it was helpful in the sense that it helped connect me with people, right? Just like having like authentic human connections with a range of different kinds of people who had a range of different experiences, either with Flint in particular, or more broadly, a lot of the, kind of issues that Flint faces. It was the fuel. It was like a source of, it was a well to draw from to get yourself real motivated to read about corrosion control or whatever. It was, it also was, there was this kind of, I also felt a kind of, it also helped me feel a sense of responsibility, like a lot of the emotions, I think, kind of like crystallize in the sense of responsibility, where I'm like, this is an unusual opportunity that I have. I want to make sure that I do this as well as I can, right? I don't want to, I know this matters. I feel in my gut that this matters. And I just want to try to give this community the attention and care and nuance that it deserves, I mean, because it's like, I mean, because it matters and the people matter. And I want to keep professional about things too, but I also want to make sure that I hope what comes through the book, through the words, even though I'm not a character in the book, I don't show up there as an I person, but I hope that it doesn't feel like a cold research report. I hope people feel the emotion that comes from this, especially when we talk about something like water, where it's like so elemental. It's literally what we're made of. And especially here in the Great Lakes state, it's like so core to our very being and our idea of home and the idea of
I mean, sorry.
yeah. No,
I,
just idea of just like breaking trust with that is just like is just an excruciating thing to go through. And I feel like, yeah, I do feel emotion about that.
thinking of the irony of the Great Lakes, Great Times slogan. I mean,
I know. And I was think about this a lot. I've talked about this like sometimes when I do other events. It's like I feel like, I mean, with the Flint Water Crisis, I mean, Michigan really became a warning story for folks elsewhere. I mean, I still have my Google alerts on from the olden days. I mean, I see how many communities are replacing their lead pipes. When I wrote this book, only 2 cities in the entire nation had ever replaced all their lead pipes. We know they're toxic. We know they're aging. We know they contribute to all these negative health things. We know the reasons they were put in were sometimes nefarious, like deals, very, monopoly, whatever. But only 2 communities had ever done it. It was Madison, Wisconsin, and Lansing, Michigan. Those were the only 2. And not because they had an acute emergency that prompted them to do it, just because it was the right thing to do. And there's lots of reasons nobody else had done it. It's expensive, it's complicated, the ownership, the legal stuff was tricky. Nobody was asking for it. Like, no voter, that's not the thing they care about. It can take a long time. If you're elected official, you may not even see it through. There's no ribbon cutting. There's all kinds of reasons that nobody cared about lead pipes. And now it's got billions in funding from the infrastructure bill. I mean, there has been a notable turnaround where people are thinking about water and water systems and infrastructure and lead in general in a way that's different than what it was before. And that's been really interesting to see play out. And it's still unfolding, of course.
I want to turn to one of our questions in the chat from Carrie King, who writes, what kind of documents and historical documents did you use in your research? Did you pull a lot of FOIAs? What kind, from where?
Yeah, good question. So especially early on, I was just, every document is interesting to me. Just mountains. I have bins in my room where I have just so many things, some of which were explicitly, useful, for what's on the page, but also others that were just part of my own active listening, as somebody who's entering this community and trying to understand its particulars. A few things that were kind of fun that and unexpected that I came across. Like I remember going through these shoe boxes of photos in City Hall of from the Parks Department. Like they had all these like old images. They used to have this like really well-staffed Parks Department. They had 11 people just on their forestry crew. And it was a community that like loved its parks and especially the waterways and pools and ponds and spring, like all these like fountains, like in all these places, and just like seeing the story of water told through these like shoebox of images, was a really interesting thing to absorb. And also just interesting, of course, too, because you're seeing sort of like the segregation like play out through the images too, like who's pictured, who's not, and sometimes some unexpected integration, and then it made me like, oh, why is that? Like so it was just this interesting way of like a different way of seeing the community than I had otherwise. I wrote a little thing about that. I'll share that in the minute. With FOIA, like I actually didn't have to request as much as you would think, given where the story was at the time. There was congressional investigations, there's lawsuits where all this material is like just showing up. We are a state where both the governor's office and the legislature are exempt from FOIA, which is a point of contention among journalists every day. In this case, there was, of course, particular interest and knowing what conversations were or were not happening in the governor's office at the time of this like water crisis. A lot of pressure was being put on the governor's office to release them voluntarily, release emails and so forth. And they did. And so this was like unusual access that normally would not be available to any journalist. It was available to all folks, and just these tranches of emails that turned out to be actually really quite revealing.
Are those still available online? Can people go still
They
read the
should
writer's
be. I
journal?
remember going back to them at some point, and this page they were on was like not as functional as it should be.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure, I didn't do a full look to see if they like got moved somewhere else or whatever. And I'm sure there's others who have like, copied and archived them in some fashion, if no one else lawyers. And so they're there. But they should, like, I actually should go and check and see if that's still, because that's, it's an important historic record, of course.
We have another question in the chat, but before we get to that, I have one from me. I wanted to ask, what were some of the nonfiction journalism books that really inspired you along the way, whether they were specific to writing about cities or the environment or just general nonfiction books? Here's your chance to offer a few shout outs.
I love that you did this, because I did put myself on kind of a film festival but reading equivalent, like reading, like it was just
Oh,
like
yeah.
both classics of like environmental literature,
Mhm.
and also things that of course like pertain very specifically to what I was looking into. And a few favorites. I love The Death and Life of the Great Lakes by Dan Egan. Note
Oh,
how that title parallels Jane Jacobs.
mm.
He was a longtime Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, Great Lakes reporter. He's since written another book that's really good about phosphorus and algae blooms. And he's so good. He's so good about being both rigorous about the science, but narratively compelling.
Yeah.
And he tells stories in this like kind of episodic way. The water is the main character, but but you still have enough human feeling in it to feel
Mhm.
kind of connected. I learned from that. Another one I learned a lot from was Tom's River by Dan Fagan. Which about Tom's River, New Jersey, and the chemical dye industry. And this was
Mm.
one where I learned a lot from it in the sense of like, that was also a kind of an ensemble story in a lot of ways, with a lot of history, a lot of those like weaving things. That was the one where it really kind of crystallized this idea for me about how compelling exposition can be
Mm.
if you're writing about something interesting, you know. So like it gave me some more nerve, I think, to go forth there. I think a lot of us think that if there's not a character, it's therefore boring and you just need to get in and out as soon as
Mm.
possible. I'm like, what if like we brought like some real verve to the writing of you know, the history of chemical dyes in New
Well,
Jersey.
like your
It's
lead section didn't have any characters that I remember, and it was still really good.
I'm glad it was. And credit to, you know, my unofficial mentor, you know, and vegan and like and helping me get there. I read Silent Spring, which I'd never read for the first time, which is also like I have a whole soapbox to get on that about what a like pre-Watergate and Vietnam book that is. It has,
Mm,
I mean, it's very good. It's very good, but it's also the tone, like the way it's written, its relationship to authority is very clearly from like a different era. Super interesting.
interesting.
And oh God, there's so many others. Now I'm gonna forget them
Well,
all.
no,
I
that's
read the
okay.
entire
As I
Carter
was
report.
asking that, I was aware that when people ask me that, I have like shelves of books, and I always my mind goes blank. But those were three great recommendations. Okay, now Jeremy Kohler asks, how
Jeremy.
did you manage to keep the personal stories of Flint residents at the forefront while diving into the dense scientific and political details? Was there a moment when one of those stories helped you better understand the
Oh,
broader systemic failures?
that's a good question. Because I think that's interesting how it applies somewhat differently in both the reporting in the reporting process versus the writing process. Um, in the writing, it kind of, as you expect, you know, kind of shifts between um the kind of like narrative exposition and the characters, and they sort of come in uh kind of chronologically more or less as their stories like came to the fore, their voices like kind of showed up, or but there was people but the reporting process and the foundation of the writing process is, of course, you know, like hearing, you know, just hearing all these different people about their experiences, certainly about the water and their lives in Flint and all that, but also about like all kinds of other things. So like one great gift was a connection with a couple named Jan and Ted, who lived in Flint. And they were like, Jan in particular was one of my first connections, and they generously like let me like stay at their house for extended periods of time, and just being present for like the ordinary life for stretches of time was really important. Both to like connect with them and their friends, and on their like they have a little sun porch, and they ring the bell at the exact time of sunset every time.
Mm.
Ben Pauly, who I mentioned with the kids who are the Flint Flight, but he's their neighbor, like right across the way. And just having just the kind of like organic conversations that were happening, like people what people talk about when they want to talk about stuff. You know, just being like a listener for what was coming up in these like kind of sunroom conversations were was helpful for me to kind of stay anchored and feel making sure that I was like kind of not getting so lost in the weeds of some interesting history from the 1890s or whatever, you know, like, you know, just and making sure that I'm like, this is like part of real people's lives. Jan shows up and they show up in the book a little bit. They also like um, the folks in the Civic Park neighborhood, including the pastor who shows up in the that story from just this year, who's a strong leader in there. He's one of the recurring folks in um in the book as well, and he's such for me, I felt like such a like kind of like a moral force in a lot of ways, with somebody who's just really trying hard to build up Flint, to reimagine, you know, to have to engage with youth, to reimagine this like very hard hit neighborhood, and repurposing vacant homes in ways that like meet community needs. And just seeing how folks were making choices for a future in Flint, for a future for themselves, for a future for their the young folks, for their neighborhoods. All that helped me make sure that this book, I feel like it helped me make sure that this book didn't get so both lost in the weeds or backward looking, that it, you know, that it didn't that it kind of like starts getting, dare I say, leaden. um,
I have a few more questions. I think we'll go a little bit past 8 if that's okay with you. Um, One is for the journalists in the audience, because this is an SPJ event after all. One's for the kind of general public. The journalist question is, what advice do you have for journalists who are thinking about writing a book-length story? Maybe another way of asking that is, if you could go back in time and talk to your younger self before you embarked on this project, what advice would you give?
Yeah, that's a good question. I do think there's this very curious mix of ego and humility that comes when you begin a book project or any really long extended project. And I feel like kind of keeping the,
Hmm.
like finding in yourself enough nerve to go forth, even when it feels really hard and uncertain, takes a little self-belief. At the same time, of course, a humility and is essential in just being open to what you don't know, and to what might contradict things, and to how the story may change. Of course, this was all playing out as I was writing on it. I didn't know how things were gonna quote end, by the time I had to turn the book in. Um, letting go of like certain preconceptions. Um, like it was just really important, and just not getting, just remembering that, having enough humility of kind of like we were talking earlier. I'm just knowing that despite it being this huge thing for me personally to have a chance to like write this book or whatever, it's not the end all be all. You know what I mean? Like there's, it's just one contribution to this like larger story, and there should and must be multifaceted other stories, including and most especially like folks who are like personally rooted in Flint to like really tell this like whole story. So like having enough to be like it matters, but also it doesn't matter too much. Like trying to to like hold that, I think, is something. I think, just on a basic level, like if you do go forth with this, just like, having some support people is really helpful. Like folks who will make you food sometimes and not expect you to like show up for like this and then that, and just know you're going to be like kind of hibernating for extended period of times. That's really cool. I think also like, yeah, just like I wish I'd said no to things sooner, like sort of ongoing commitments and stuff that I'm like, I can do both. I was like, no. Just say no. Just like just give all you can. And also just yeah, just do it. I mean, I feel like, there's so many stories that matter in the world. Only some of them get told. And then an even smaller portion get told well.
Mm.
I mean, all this work that folks are doing, it really matters, like to go forth with like a good heart to like do the best you can to let it change you. I mean, I love Flint. I go to Flint like pretty um regularly. I wish more often, but like pretty regularly. I mean, I feel like an ongoing connection there. I hope I can be of use, I guess in general. And I feel like I did learn things. So if and when I do another, larger project, I think I can, go forth and, apply it there. So the point is, don't let perfection be your enemy.
Mm.
That otherwise you'll just never do anything.
Yes. I can add that the only reason you and I are standing here with finished books is that at some point we said, it's just got to be done.
It's just got to be done. Honestly, I mean, they
It took
made
me
me say
15
that.
years.
If I could have had like 6 more months, it'd be gold.
um, okay, so that was the journalist question. Here's like the policy question. I'm speaking to you from a city that actually gets name checked in the book, Providence. Not
Hmm.
for good reasons necessarily, but it's like one of those cities that's at risk for having lead in the water. If you could speak to people in other cities about the lessons you learned from looking so closely at this crisis, and I remember so distinctly one of your chapters begins with a quote from, I think it's a book, America is 1,000 Flints.
Yeah.
Um, so speak to the people in those other Flints, including Providence potentially. What do you want people to know?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. And I did, I live in Detroit. I'm a renter. I almost certainly have a lead pipe, though I haven't been able to see myself because I can't get in the thing and whatever. I think, I think a few things to know is like first, like the fun part is just like be curious about where your water comes from. I think a lot of folks
Mm.
like don't even know, like, what is your source? Is it an aquifer? Is it a river? What river? Like, do you know? Like just have a little curiosity about what the source of your water is, and just kind of enjoy that. Just enjoy that like kind of relationship, about like this like kind of interconnectedness. There's a little bit of maybe the river that finds its way into your home, like every day. That's amazing. It's kind of fun to just take a pause and feel gratitude to the ingenuity and effort that like made this possible. It was not profitable. That's why these are public works. It was not profitable. They tried it. It didn't work. But people nonetheless like created this like, a state of things now where we have many of us like have come to be privileged enough to take for granted that water is this like basic civic right, that we should have it from not one, but multiple points in our home, even if we're a renter, even if we're a student, even if we're living in humble, but like it is just like what happened during COVID. We cut everything, not water. You know what I mean? Like that's one of the essential services. So just like, first of all, just take a minute and just enjoy this and give a little thanks to those doing the thankless effort of trying to like maintain your water system. Okay. And then secondarily, I just, I think it is worth like knowing for sure if you do have a lead pipe, whether you're an owner or renter. NPR made a cute little app that kind of walks you through the process of, being able to see if you have a lead pipe. That's one cool way to do it. To just know. And whether you do or don't, you might have lead, in-house infrastructures, especially like brass fixtures or things like that. A lot of, sometimes like the lead gets through, not through the pipe itself, but like some of the inner workings. So one thing you can do if you do have some concern is don't give up on public water, because it's, ingenious and wonderful. But like if you do feel like you need a filter, there's get one that is certified by NSF for removing lead. That is a credible organization that actually checks us. There's a lot of like claims of being like lead-free filters that, it's just mismarketing. There's no regulation that really on that. So personally, what I do is I have like, I use the tap water, and I have kind of like a counter and fridge filter that I came from that are certified by these folks. I also recommend flushing the water. This is one of the things they use to make lead. They have historically used to make it seem like there's less lead in the water than there really is. Like they flush it for a little while and then take a sample, and lead is most likely to kind of like burst out in that first bit. But of course, most people just, so just flush it, especially if you in the morning, when it hasn't been running for the night, or when you've been on away vacation, just like let it run for a little bit. You can recycle it. You can use it for your plants or whatever. It doesn't have to go to waste. And anyway, so those are just a few things. But in general, I think it's also worth just remembering that your water is safer if your neighbors are connected to water. This is one of the issues that come up in like Flint, where there's a lot of vacancy. The water sits still longer
Mm.
in pipes where there's not, where there's a lot of vacancy. It just doesn't move as much as it should. Still water is more likely to be unsafe. You want it to be moving a healthy, so like, this is one reason why I think this is so fascinating. Like the infrastructure makes it very clear how we're all connected, and it's not, like the quality of my water depends on my neighbors having quality water too.
Mm. Anna, are you working on another book? Will you write another book?
I have an idea. I have a thing that's been on my mind for a while, but I haven't like rigorously gone forward with it. So I'm not going to say it yet,
Okay.
but but I like it. So, so maybe we'll see what happens.
We will stay tuned for that. Um, is there anything I didn't ask you that you would want people to know about this book or this work that you're doing, or the work you're still doing?
Oh, well, you've been such a thoughtful questioner. I'm not sure if there's anything that really like stands out. Just that I guess the other thing that we didn't really talk about that I just want to put out there is the importance of accountability in, stories where there is some kind of wrong. One reason a lot of folks in Flint say that the water crisis isn't over is because no one's been held accountable. And that arc of the story is sort of still unfolding in some ways. There was also a class action judgment that was announced in 2020, but nobody's been paid anything yet. It's this complicated morass that's been just going for a while. Correction, locals haven't been paid yet. Some lawyers have. They've gotten like some installments on one of the things. So there's this kind of like, I think for those of you who are engaging with stories that's about of crisis in one form or another, being attentive to that like long tail of like accountability long after people like look away, seeing what happens and why, who's held accountable, who's not, what does it reveal about the laws that exist, the policies that exist, I don't know, like just how power works. All this is like really, I think, like important to be attentive to. I mean, people aren't paying attention to Flint like they were back in 2016, but in a lot of, I think there's a lot to be learned by this kind of strange, no accountability place, no formal accountability place that we found ourselves in, despite this being such a well-known man-made crisis that affected real lives.
When you were saying all that, it made me think of your own words, yours and Sarah Beth's words from that piece from May, which may be a good note to end on. You end that piece with this paragraph. Flint residents have emphasized the importance of determining for themselves when justice has been done. In a 2020 paper, a cohort of community advocates wrote that they expect accountability, policy reform, and community-driven investments. And we will be insisting, they wrote, as always, that people ask us and our fellow residents before concluding that Flint has been made whole. I really liked how you ended that piece with that. Well, Anna, congratulations on a really extraordinary book, an important book, and a very readable book. I learned so much from it, and it's been such a pleasure speaking with you tonight. Thank you for sharing your time with us. This will go up to YouTube, where it'll be watched all over the world, we hope. But until next time, thank you all to all of those of you who came and joined the Zoom. Thank you, and thank you to SPJ New England for hosting us. I'm sure they would love for me to plug them and to follow them on Twitter and Facebook, where they will be telling you about other great events. And I'm wishing you all a very good evening. Thanks, Anna.
Thank you, everyone.